Hello and welcome to Book Review on Trust TV. On the show, we talk with African and international authors, review books and adaptations while inspiring, especially the younger generation, into inculcating the habits of book reading. Today, we'll be talking about the book Devil's Pawn. But let's take a short break, and when we come back, you'll get to meet the author of this great book. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Book Review on Trust TV. Now, one glance at a book and you hear the voice of another person, perhaps someone dead for 1,000 years. To read is to voyage through time, and that journey is entertaining, educational, informative, and inspirational. Our guest for today is the author of 4 collections of poetry. He won the 2018 Dusty Manuscripts Prize, 2017 ANA Prize for Fiction, first runner-up, also Nigerian Writer Award for Best Poet in Nigeria, and Orange Crush Prize for Poetry 2012. He is a multimedia journalist, youth mentor, and publishing entrepreneur. Welcome, Kuko Irue-Siri Samson.
Thank you.
Kuko, hope I did make justice
to it, Alex. Yeah, I'll give it to you for your first time, so it's good.
Okay, well, that's good. So, Kuko, tell us about your journey, as a writer, not just a writer, but an award-winning writer.
Well, I like to think of myself as just a writer because I would say the awards, maybe I've not gotten the ones I want to get yet. So, writer, yes. Writing came to me as a way of expressing. I grew up as a very alone child. My dad moved a lot. And because of the movement, he tended to, I don't know, for whatever reason, prefer to carry me along while my siblings stayed. So I was this jump around kid. And he had lots of books. Of course, an adult, very busy, he's working here, and I'm just alone. And then books became my friend. Of course, if you read a lot of books, you have a lot of stories brimming inside you. And what better way to tell your stories than write your own stories? Mm. So I started writing, not because I wanted to be a writer, but because I had things I wanted to say to somebody. And since I didn't have friends to gist a lot, I was gisting with my paper. And of course, when you gist on paper, somebody looks at you and says, this is nice. You get more encouraged, and then I find myself here where I am now, writing, regularly.
Oh, wow.
Now,
at what particular stage did you, pick your pen to start writing? Was it in primary school, secondary school?
I think the earliest writings I can remember, probably sometime around 1999. Thereabout, I think. I was still much younger. I met a copper who came to our school to do youth service, and he had a drama group. I liked the fact that they were acting. I wasn't writing then, but I read a lot. I used to read a lot. Now reading his scripts for his plays, and I thought they were not as good as, when I look at them in my head, and I helped him to adjust some of those things. And you should be a good writer. You should write. And then I was thinking, if somebody who I admire thinks I write better than him, I was even giving me his scripts to change the dialogues, to put in some characterization and all of that. Okay, let me start writing my own stuff. But I didn't start with fiction. It was poetry that felt more relatable to me because I didn't want to have to write a whole long stories with 100 characters or thousands of scenes I must sing. Poetry, briefly, I just put it down. So I told my stories in poetry for a long time until I think maybe when I was in the university, many years after.
Wow. Why poetry though?
Because poetry is easy. Not easy, I won't say easy. Good poetry is not easy. But poetry is like a slice of emotion, unlike a story which is a complete loaf. You have to have the whole thing for a novel to be completed. But a slice, you could just write 4, 10, 20 lines, and you tell a complete story in a poem. But in a novel, of course, or even a short story, you know how many words you have to string, believability, you have to create new characters and make them real life, relatable. But in poetry, you can just think about, say, how beautiful these lights are, and write a poem about just the lights, and you're okay for that moment.
Interesting.
So that's why poetry is kind of easier now in that context.
Okay, so as a young man who started his career in writing at a very young age, what is your thoughts on, the younger generation and their way of, should I say, reading generally these days?
I think, first of all, we'll start from the parents who are raising the children. I go to most homes now, there is no book in sight in their living room. In my own, growing up, there is a bookshelf at the corner of the house that is full of books. And each time you walk past, you see the titles and the spines. And when you just see something like, say, The Devil's Pawn, and you're passing, just The Devil's Pawn, you want to know what's The Devil's Pawn, and you pick it up. You're not even read the whole book, but you just flip through a few pages, and you're like, oh, okay, this character, I like this character, and then you go into the story. Now, not just creative works. When I was growing up, I was reading encyclopedia because my father had all of those books, Reader's Digest, even the Ikebe Super, which was not for my age then, but I read them and they didn't corrupt me as people thought they would. It just made me, more witty and creative in my writing. I bring those things into my own work now. So the first thing is, as a parent, how do you have a house that has no bookshelf in any corner? It just doesn't work for me. In my living room, since I've been an adult, there's always a shelf. Like there's always a shelf, even with books I will not read. Maybe I just love the cover somewhere in a bookshop, or my friend or somebody I know is doing a book reading, and I get the book, and I will buy the book and put it in my shelf. So that when I pass, I make games, I arrange them sometimes in a way they look like it's a sentence. Write a book about a boy and a book about the woman, a book about an adult. You just have to put kids around where those books are. And granted, we are now in technology, so most people are on their phones, not on the shelves. You could also do the same thing with books, with electronic devices. There are so many books that you could read. So if your kids are the book type, start them with illustrated small short story books. There are so many of them are out there, and from them reading those, they could get into the hardcover, books. So it's about the parents, not really the kids. If you grow up in a place where there are no books around, even the Bible and the Quran, some people don't have it lying around in the house. So how do you want them to read books? It's not going to be magic.
So it's all the parents.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you mentioned Devil's Pawn. Now, Devil's Pawn is a captivating tale on patriarchy, revenge, corruption, and also fiction. So you mixed a usual, story with happiness or happenings in corrupt and violent society, and then an unusual story about, shall I say, is it the ghost thing, marine thing,
yes.
and all that? How did you come up with that idea?
First of all, it's not really strange. Like if you grow up in the places where I grew up, I happen to grow up in rural areas a lot. I was in Ife, which is a very cultural, place, in Zaria, in Sokoto, Kano, Jos. These are places where I live. I live close to nature and close to ordinary people. I've never really lived in like highbrow areas where all you see are cinemas and all of that. What am I driving at? You hear stories of real ordinary people. And some of those experiences you will find in Devil's Pawn, they're not altogether unreal. Maybe somebody disappearing. There are things we've been hearing. I don't know whether they are true, because I haven't experienced some of them in real life. But in my own personal limited experiences, I've experienced the supernatural. And everybody believes, you either believe in God as a Muslim or as a Christian. If you believe there's good and there's evil, there should be forces around both sides. So those forces are not only going to appear in the church or in the mosque, they also appear in your normal everyday life. So if somebody has a power to disappear, not die, dodge bullets, or even endow it to other people, it shouldn't be so unbelievable. But because we look at it from the lens of our religion, sometimes we don't see these things. But look at some strange happenings around you. I have a lot of personal anecdotes I could bring that I still believe that they are real, because they just cannot not be real. Yes, so somebody dying in your compound as a kid, a neighbor died, and after they were trying to bury him, they didn't know how to, in those days you need to have the families. So they put him in the mortuary, and they contacted the family to come and, take the, this person. They saw some documents in the house, and they traced his family. And the family said, this man has already died many years ago. Okay, so how do you explain something like that? This is a direct neighbor. So some of these things happen a lot. I've had an instance where something like a presence, came upon me in a place where people have had the same kind of experience. So what is that presence? Repeated, what is science? Proving things with evidence. You test it and try it. So if it happened to me and many people before me for many years, there's a presence there. So what is that presence if it's not a human being? So the story, it borrows a lot from the real African experience. It may look like a John Grisham story with all of the action, the sequence of fights and all of that, but if you brought down to the story, you will see a lot of Africanness, like a real nature connection and African cultural connection in it.
I would even emphasize with the Nigerianness.
Nigerian, very Nigerian.
Yeah. Okay, so, you know, how did you play between this, how did you interplay between the physical, spiritual, and there is a bit of action, you know, and also the mystery aftermath of this book?
So if you say the mystery, there are things that came about from the usual human feelings in life. A mistake here, you rape somebody, which is not a right thing to do, and then you think it's an ordinary person. The way we deal with people, we see somebody and like, who are you? And then you know the Nigerian thing, do you know who I am?
Yeah.
Of course, the original culprit saw the girl as a nobody. I ask you out and you don't accept. Do you know who I am? And then she also, you kill me, you rape me and kill me. Do you know who I am? I will show you who I am. So everybody in the story is, the mystery is revolving around the Nigerian thing of that everybody shows exertion. They want to exert that influence that they have. And of course, when you pit plenty of people trying to exert influences against each other, there's going to be a lot of action, and powerful people for that matter. Emeka is powerful in that he has a group of violent people. She is powerful because she has some supernatural powers. He becomes powerful. The boy Simon becomes powerful because she endows him with some power. The governor is powerful enough to manipulate somebody like Benson to go. So there's power everywhere, and when power meets in a place, you know what they say about forces of equal, meeting, there's always going to be an explosion. And so that's where in my life, I imagine a lot. I'm a very imaginative person, and it works in everything I do. Even when I'm looking at text, I begin to imagine the symmetry and whatnot is there. So I imagine a situation where I'll tell a story that talks about so many things, the political thing, the assassinations, and the violence against women, violence against people, male to male, campus violence. So you may not really get the full essence of the story if you don't read it to the end and see how they weave into a single plot. So me now, the way I wove that story around the mystery around it is bring in the things people know, that they know. And if you read it well, you find out that no experience is unreal there. Even though they may sound scary, some people may be tense in reading the story, you find out everything there, when you look at it and think about it, this is actually things that have happened here. And a small hint, almost everything there can be linked to a real story. If you ask me anything, I'll tell you what I drew the inspiration from in real Nigerian life.
Interesting. Okay, now I'm sure that you've piqued the interest of the viewers, and people would want to, just in a very coded way, just give us a tip of what the story entails. What should readers, look forward to when picking that book from the shop?
So it's something I've been asked more than once, and I always tell them, because of the so many subplots in the story, it's hard for me to tell you this is what the story is. But one thing I will tell you is, if you make the mistake of reading through the first 10 pages, you are likely not to want to stop until you get to the end, because first, the story is a very short story in terms of number of days. It's not, some novels can span a year or 2 years. This is a story that happened, the core of it is like 7 days. So it's a 7 days sequence of events. And the same way 7 days are short in the human story, it's the same way the story makes you feel like the time is short. So you want to quickly get to the next day. And all of the stories are so neatly, tightly interwoven that you will move forward. Now, about the story itself, I'll just say, it's a story that combines everything you would want in a good story. It's thriller. There's a lot of scary, sequenced action, investigation, like real deep, a lot of cliffhangers here and there, and the subplots are crazy. Like I said, if you read the first few pages and you say, yeah, this is where the story is going to, you will be far thrown off course very soon. And I did ensure to make sure the stories link all through, but you won't be able to guess. It's not a Nollywood film where you would say, this man is going to do this, and maybe when you will not, even I myself, in writing the story, and it's a funny story. I wrote it in this same environment. Most of it is written in this same environment, and in writing the story, I didn't know the ending of my story. I changed the ending in my head several times before I finally picked one ending I felt was, I pleased myself in the ending. It wasn't about the character. It was because the story is very personal, so I had to do an ending. It was too many times. I finished the work and I left the ending to decide what will happen to these three people that at this point. And it was the last thing I did.
Interesting. We have more story for you, more questions for you rather. But quickly, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue from where we stopped. Stay tuned.
Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Book Review on Trust TV. And before we went on a break, we were talking about The Devil's Pawn. So let's move on to more questions. So this book, it takes the reader through a thrilling experience. You mentioned thrilling as your characters' individual pursuits, for revenge, justice, survival, love. There is love, right?
Yeah, a lot of it, yeah.
And power, they became intertwined. Why a haunting tale? Why that?
People remember what scares them well. And I love a little bit of horror stories. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared, so I like horror stories. And the truth is that in our actual lives, we tend to color everything, make it like we have a stream of happiness. But if you look at your life, the average person's life, a lot of horrifying things happen that we share. I wanted a story that is real. Like I said, these stories are very real. You could almost point to go to Google and Google that experience. You find somebody who has passed through every sequence of experience. So I wanted something that would scare people, something that was real, that they can see in their real life. And I kind of decided to put it together. And mind you, the title of the book, Devil's Pawn, that's actually, if you get it's there, that's where you find the real story. Everybody in the story is a pawn. Every single person is a pawn of somebody. You can start from the policeman. He's a pawn of the system. He was pushed into a case he didn't want to be in, and because his boss, they were giving him a mandate, he was there. The boy who was part of a murder he didn't want to be part of is a pawn of the court. The court man himself is a pawn of the governor. Benson is a pawn of the governor. Everybody is a pawn of somebody. Simon is a pawn of the woman now controlling him to be to become whatever he wants to become. The woman herself, who is dead, is a pawn of the rules of her water spirit group, where she has to avenge her death to be able to enter into the afterlife comfortably. So everybody is a pawn in the story. So it's a bit a way of people trying to escape their chains from somebody. So it's a group of pawns fighting to be free of pawnhood. And in that attempt, if you want to escape, like if you see crabs in a bowl, you want to escape from the bowl. As you're trying to go out, somebody else is pulling you in so you can pass over your head to go. That's the struggle between them.
Okay, speaking of struggle, it links to my next question. So, as the writer of this book, The Devil's Pawn, what would you say was your most challenging, is it scene or chapter that you had to come back to, and you don't know how, to just pass that particular stage?
So first of all, it's the whole book, because I wrote that book many years before it became published. I'm very meticulous with my stories. Like I say, poetry is easy. It comes easy. You can take it out. But for me to get a story that is believable, So my major challenge is not a part of the book, but in actually making it believable. So for example, I read some books, Nigerian thrillers, and you see talking about police investigating a case in Nigeria, and it looks like this thing can never happen in Nigeria. This is not how police in Nigeria behave. This is how they behave in Europe, not in Nigeria, and the story is Nigerian, and it is not believable. Or you see a scene where somebody escapes from prison, from police custody, and you're thinking, can somebody escape like this in real life? You've seen movies where you say, this is too easy. Why do you make it that easy? So in making my story believable, I did a lot of unconventional things. I asked people who were involved. I did a lot of YouTube research. For example, a scene where somebody escaped from handcuffs. It took me days to write and a lot of YouTube videos asking, how do you escape from cuffs? And I had to tie myself up. Went in my house, because when I write my stories, I put places that are real in my head so I can describe it to full detail. So the toilet was the toilet in my house, and he was trying to escape from the toilet. I had to go into my toilet with my arms bound, and then did what they said you should do in YouTube. And I said, let me see if it is possible. And then after trying it for a long time, and it worked, I said, okay, yes, I can put it in my story because I won't believe if it doesn't work. Same thing with the police part. I spoke with a commissioner of police, a former commissioner of police, endlessly, like continuously. I asked him, if you want to investigate somebody in this circumstance, what do you do? If you need to do this thing out of the normal rule, how do you do? So I had to ask a lot of questions, and that was the harder part. I have my story. The story is written beginning to the end, but how can it be believable? How will it be real? So I'm writing about somebody smoking weed, for example, and acting based on the weed. What you see most times is people write about he put the weed and then he became mad. But it's not believable. I want to say a transition for me, and I don't smoke and I don't drink. So how do I make transitions of somebody who is? So I have to watch a lot of videos of people doing it, ask people I know that are in that, and there's more time making my work believable than I actually spent in writing the work.
Okay.
So that's the difficult part.
That is a really interesting fact. For our viewers, this is the page, the front page, and this is a really amazing cover. So now, here, I want you to just pick a paragraph or two that can actually pick the interest, because I'm sure with everything you've said, you've picked the interest of the viewers already, but just read something out for us.
Oh, let me see. I'm trying to find a place that is short enough. Okay. And also in context. I don't know. One paragraph. Would I be able to read the page?
Let's go.
Okay. Because for it to, I'll start from page 35 and I will go. He could see the dump site ahead of him. It was a mountain of household waste, mostly. There was a bush a few feet from the heap, and behind that was the fence of a decrepit government secondary school. There was a sign stuck in the heap, no dumping of refuse here. Offenders to pay 20,000 naira fine by order. Simon tossed the bag onto the heap of refuse, relieved to see that there were many other bags there that looked freshly dumped. Stop there! The voice had come from behind him. He turned around. A policeman with a baton in his hand was walking towards him. Simon glanced past his shoulder. The policeman must have been hiding in the bush. That's why he hadn't noticed him. The man's eyes were glassy, like he was high. He looked almost comical with his thick mustache twisted at the fringes and the faded beret plastered to the top of his head. You know Sabi read? The officer asked, pointing at the sign. Simon stepped away from the side of the dump where he had dropped his bag, making up his mind to pick a random nylon bag of refuse if the policeman asked him to retrieve his dirt. There was no way the policeman would know the difference. Officer, I beg. No vex, I go carry am comot. Wetin you carry come here, sef? No vex, officer, I no go do am again. Simon made to pick up a random black nylon bag. Now your bag be that? Yes. Simon checked to see if the policeman had another weapon beside the baton and handcuffs clasped to the waistband of his pants. Nothing. Thank God, he could bolt. You fit leave am there, sha, but you go first settle, the policeman grinned. Simon relaxed. The man just wanted money. He smiled, reached into his pocket and brought out a 1,000 naira note. The officer did not collect the money. Una go intentionally do bad thing, come they beg. Simon knew it would be risky to spend one more minute talking to this man. He was high and out of his mind. He could suddenly ask for the full 20,000 naira fine, or worse, ask him to pick up this bag and show him its contents. Simon reached into his pocket again and added 2,000 to the money in his hand. The officer stuck his baton between his joined thighs and snatch the note, you can go. But if I catch you again, I know we'll collect 3,000. Simon hurried away thinking about the officer's twisted mustache.
Interesting. Now you've gotten people curious on who Simon really is.
And what is in the bag.
And what is in the bag, yes.
That's the most important part.
Okay, so what message, did you intend for the reader to take home, from this story?
So I like that question, because behind every of my writings is also was always this intention to say something important to people. And luckily, this book gave me the opportunity to say a whole lot. Like, you can see what I just read about how, let me just give a small expose. What is in that bag is something really serious, it's human parts. And if the policeman had just done his job, this story would have ended on page maybe 70. Everything would have been stopped. He would have arrested Simon and probably the story would end. But because of 3,000 naira, he let the body parts of 3 people escape him on the refuse dump. And this is the lesson with Nigeria. Like, a lot of things happen. It's another scene where Simon escaped lynching. And after he escaped, somebody was asking, what did he even do? And he was like, I saw them pursuing him and they say he did something. He didn't even know, but he was with stone and petrol to burn Simon up. So there's a lot of lessons all over for young people. Don't join cultism, don't join, which is like one of the lesser, but there's also some things you think you know, but they are beyond what you know. You think being among flashy people, like killing an innocent girl, you think it's going to end there. This consequence of killing that girl brought down a governor, brought down all kinds of people. Just that killing somebody in a school, in a campus environment, brought down the governor of another state. Many crimes of many years ago were solved because of that. So things have consequence. And I always believe in karma, positive and negative. So all through the story, you will see snippets of the bad things wrong with Nigeria. All the things wrong, like the boy himself wouldn't have been involved with the people he was involved with if the security of his campus had done their job. He kept on reporting, something is happening to me. And he kept on saying, no, get away, get away. And that was what triggered everything.
That's amazing.
So there's no direct moral story in this, moral statement in the story. I'm not a moralist, but I show you how wrong decisions can lead to lifetime regrets and all of that.
Thank you so much, Kuko Irwesiri Samson. Thank you for coming.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure being part of the show.
Same as well.
Yes.
So as author Anna Quinlan said, books are the plane and books are train and they are road. They are the destination and the journey. They are home. And that is it on today's episode of Book Review on Trust TV. I am Sumaya Abubakar. Do not forget to always read a book. Thank you for watching. Until next time. Bye.